Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, I would just do it with the introduction. Hi, I'm Sarah Silverstein, Executive Editor at Business Insider. We are at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. I am here live with Ian Bremmer, President of the Eurasia Group. And tomorrow is Inauguration Day. Donald Trump is going to become our president. What is the feeling? What can we expect? And what can the best and brightest minds of Davos, what are they expecting from President Trump?
I would say you've got a real transition with a lot of public figures here that know that they're going to be normalizing him real soon. And they're in the process of doing that, right? I mean, if you are the CEO of a public company, I don't care what you thought beforehand. Now suddenly he's fine. And you're going to find a way to say the right things and put on your public face. So that process is happening. You can feel people go through it right now because it's very hard to maintain, unless you're a sociopath, to have a radically different public persona than you do privately. So you've got a few people here like Larry Summers who are like really out there, like being super critical. But this is like, you'd say, well, wait a second. Last year I talked to you guys and like we were talking about Trump last year and everyone said, you thought this guy was in a sort of a complete disaster. Has he become suddenly better? It's like, well, so people are turning themselves into knots. There is a concern among the folks that really are looking at the global environment. The domestic environment, I think the Davos crew is actually very happy. They're happy because they think that they're going to do well personally. They're happy because they see that the regulatory environment will become more streamlined and pro-industry. They're happy because they believe that there'll be some spend on infrastructure, some privatization, some opportunity to make money. But internationally, I think there's a lot of concern. And one of the greatest areas of concern has to be from the Chinese. It's kind of funny because Xi Jinping came here and it was the big speech and everyone said, wow, that is, he wins Davos. But the Chinese didn't want to win Davos. The Chinese wanted to give this speech in a few years, like Hillary Clinton as president, let them keep doing incrementally, softly, get bigger, get stronger, and just like pick up allies and do more in economic investment. Instead, they've got Trump, they've got the anti-globalist. China feels like they need to defend it, they need to occupy that space when they're not quite ready. And when they're in the middle of a leadership transition internally, as Xi Jinping is consolidating power with the Party Congress coming up in the fall. Plus, not only Trump, but also many of those around him have been leveling fire at China on almost everything. And so the potential for real confrontation between the world's two most important economies, I think, is actually real. And I think that's underappreciated here at Davos. Because people are saying, well, you can't predict what Trump is going to do. Well, actually, you're the same people that are predicting that he's going to do great things for the U.S. economy at home, some of which I happen to agree with. But you can't keep those two things in your head at the same time. So, I mean, clearly there is a hell of a lot of geopolitical risk right now. And the final thing I would say is, I've been coming to Davos since 2007, so 10 years ago. I've never seen an environment where geopolitics was as front and center as it is this year. The fear and concern is absolutely there, but they don't really know what to do with it, how to invest against it, what they could do personally, can they matter? Where at least with climate, you kind of know where, okay, so it's coming, we got deniers, we got to fight them, we have to have like support for renewables. For this is an environment that Davos is about globalization. They're about economics. They're not about security. So, I mean, even though you have a lot of smart people here and people that have some nominal responsibility, it's not like we have the secretaries of defense in the world kind of hanging out, right? So this is a group that feels unsettled, but they don't really know how to react.
And do they know what the specific geopolitical risks that we're afraid of are, or is it more abstract? Are there specific things that we're concerned about?
Well, they know that Trump represents a level of significant uncertainty in the global order. And they also know that the Chinese government coming here and saying, we're leading the charge on globalization, and quoting from Charles Dickens and things like that. Well, I mean, China is not a democracy, not going to become one. China's not a free market economy. And while it is becoming more market-oriented over time, it's still fundamentally state capitalist. So the idea that your new globalization overlords are a country that does not have rule of law or an independent judiciary, in fact, a country that many of you do not feel particularly welcome investing in, even though you're making some money, that is, they don't know how to deal with that. So I would say that kind of uncertainty as globalization continues, but Americanization is clearly over. And this year you can say I believe that the Pax Americana as of tomorrow is over. I think that we can actually close the book on that chapter, and that we enter into a new world order. But if you're just focusing on globalization, which is what the folks at the WEF spend most of their time on, you say, well, so it's still happening, but it's happening with a model and a leader that I'm not necessarily aligned with. And so that can't be good for me. So how do I deal with that? I think they see that happening. The second order effects, things like Trump saying NATO is obsolete, Trump saying that Brexit was good, and by the way, other countries should leave. For me, that sends a signal that the Trump administration wants Le Pen to win, like proactively. Not just like happy to have her have an ice cream in Trump Tower, but proactively. And they're going to devote resources. And I know that Breitbart just opened up in France. And I know that RT.com, Russian media, just opened up in France. Those could be coincidental. I don't think they are. And while today, if the elections were to occur in France, Le Pen would lose, let's be clear, the polls have been wrong about this stuff over the last year. I've met a bunch of French people at Davos this year. They're as certain that Le Pen is going to lose as Davos last year was that Trump was going to lose, including me. And I think we need to be a little bit more cautious, because if Le Pen wins, we're seeing an unwind of Europe. And the transatlantic relationship right now is weaker than at any point. When Trump comes out and says that his relationship with Putin and Merkel are basically the same, that's literally an astounding thing for a post-war American president to say. And if you're Merkel, the most important leader in Europe, you have to react strongly to that. I think there's an open question right now as to the state of, and maybe the existence of, the U.S.-German alliance. And that is not appreciated by the people that are here.
Wow. And so how does all of this impact us domestically? How will this play out here?
In the United States?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, in the near term, the United States is going to clearly benefit from a unified government that can get stuff done and that wants to get stuff done. And everything is slower than you want it to be in the United States, but we are in the right side of the economic cycle right now. The IMF, for the first time since before 2008, has just upgraded their estimates for all the major advanced industrial democracies, and they've done that in a significant way, 50 basis points in the United States economy. That's a big deal, and a lot of people will feel better about that. That means more inflation, right, which Trump will be complaining about, and sort of clearly there's going to be a political battle over Yellen and what the successor with the Fed's going to look like and how politicized the central bank is. But I think that for the United States in the near term, this is going to economically feel good. I think the question is, and it's a really interesting question, is to what extent is the United States pursuing an Amorexit? So the Brits decided that they wanted out of Europe. And everyone says, myself including, that Brexit is going to be handled badly. It's going to hurt the UK economy. But there's no question that if you believe that Europe is going to fall apart, that Brexit is not a question of good idea, bad idea. It's only a question of when, right? Because you're not going to have a Europe to be a part of, right? And so then the Brits leaving early is not stupid. It's just a question of making sure that they can handle it right, that they can get the politics right, that the Europeans can get lined up. Now, if the Americans are taking a view, and Trump, this is not Trump's perspective, but I'm saying just broadly speaking, that the world order is coming apart and that the Americans should stop providing all the cash, the support, the diplomacy, sort of the military capabilities, because the Middle East is not fixable by the U.S. or anyone else, right? If that's the case, then, well, get out early. I mean, I think a lot of people would have liked the Americans to have gotten out before, right, Iraq and Afghanistan, the way that they did, right? The extraordinary span of those wars, the cost in human terms, the cost in financial terms, and of course, the ultimate failure of both wars. So I think in that environment, the idea of an Amerexit, where the geopolitical environment is going to get much worse for most of the world, but quite likely not in the United States. No arms race, no borders being contested, no refugees swimming to the U.S., very limited terrorism, most of it homegrown, most of it actually just wacko U.S. extremism that has nothing to do with the Middle East. All of that, I think, it plays for an argument that Amerexit is not a bad idea. And furthermore, you have an industrial revolution that's taking place, which tells you that jobs no longer are relevant for capital expansion. And so the United States, the last 35 years, you support very active globalization, because if you're a big multinational company based in the United States, an American multinational, then you increasingly don't care about American workers because they're a lot cheaper and more productive out of China. Awesome. Well, what happens if you don't need that labor anymore? What happens if labor efficiencies no longer matter to your business? Well, then why are you supporting that globalization? It's in the same way that, what happens if you no longer need Mexicans to pick your fruit? Why do you want them coming over and doing that? Now, there are good humanitarian reasons to want that. There are good strategic...
Are there good economic reasons to want that?
That's an interesting question. And I guess I would say that, clearly, if the world is on fire, you could make an argument that that's going to ultimately redound badly to the U.S. And of course, the U.S. wants to sell goods to the Chinese and the rest. But again, if China is destined to fail, because of all of these challenges we're talking about, they won't be able to maintain their social contract with their people. They're an emerging market. They're relatively brittle in terms of their political institutions. Like, this 35-year juggernaut is not going to work with the new industrial revolution. Then you could make an argument that actually walls are important, and that the United States, and I don't just mean, border walls, I mean policy walls, I mean virtual walls. And I think that's an argument that you're going to increasingly see. I'm not happy about this. I'm someone who considers myself by nature much more interested in the future of humanity than just the future of a country. I think we have more in common with each other than we do just with our fellow countrymen, right? That seems to me like an obvious thing. And I don't just mean in terms of climate, I mean everywhere. But that, as a political scientist, I cannot ignore the fact that we're not moving in that direction. Right? And so you can be an activist, but I'm not an activist. I'm an analyst. At the end of the day, my activism is about trying to help people understand the world. Yeah. That's what I'm activist about. And in that regard, I think that sitting here at Davos, where, if anything, the bubble, the disconnect between the people that are here and the folks that, were in hillbilly elegy, who felt disconnected from the establishment, that bubble feels thicker and more opaque than it did last year.
And is it just more obvious to us now because Trump won and the group of people that are here weren't necessarily expecting that?
It's more obvious because it's more in the news, and so you're talking about populism, but you recognize a lot more. but you recognize that the people here do not have the beginnings of a solution, and many of them are not particularly interested in finding one. And so that leads you to the conclusion that, well, I mean, there are only a few options, right? I mean, one is that the system falls apart. The system doesn't feel like it's falling apart. I mean, the 1% is doing better than they have at any point in human history. So that's a no. Then the second is, well, is someone here or someone somewhere else going to really address it? So far, the answer appears to be no. Okay, well, then what do you do? Well, inequality is going to grow. I mean, I think if I take anything away from Davos this year, it's that there's lots of reasons to believe that there will be extraordinary, I mean, much greater technological advances that will create extraordinary efficiency and wealth. And we feel better about the global economy in the coming year than we did in the past years, I think. And yet, we have every reason to believe that structural inequality is going to grow a lot without policy measures, with very few exceptions around the world, to address them. And that implies that populations are going to become more segregated and more separated. Now, let's be very clear. New media technologies facilitate that. Our president facilitates that, right?
How?
Well, when he puts together support for fake news organizations, when he tweets out that the dossier is false and supports OANN, which is not a news organization, it's kind of a collection of blogs that are all patriotic media, you're going to see far more people that are going to retreat into very distinct areas of identity, news, information. And that is not going to bring us closer together as a world. That's going to drive us much further apart. I'm highly aware of the fact that of the people that I engage with around the world, most aren't American. About 80% of, I think, our followers, your age group and mine, are outside the United States. I'm very aware of the fact that they're politically diverse, but I also know that that is not true of the vast majority of people in the media space. And that's going to change, too. That's getting worse. I mean, when Trump says that he wants to move the press conference out of the White House and into the old executive office, and we need to do this because, you know, it's small and there's only 50 people, and of course, you know, far more people want to see Trump than any other president in history, so you need more space, of course, and so we'll have space for 300 to 500. Well, who are those new people going to be? They're going to be patriotic media organizations, right? And those patriotic media organizations will have a very specific narrative that will not focus on facts. And that's not the intention. The intention is a motive. The intention is to promote a narrative. Now, I know that media has been moving in those directions a lot anyway, but this is going to expand and escalate that dramatically. And it works, right? I mean, it is true that the American president is weaker because the media is not patriotic. It is true that China's economy is smaller than the United States, and yet they can consistently hit above their weight in being able to get other countries to do their bidding economically because they can devote not just the president, but also line up the corporations, line up the media coverage, all the rest, and say, okay, you do it, there's a carrot that's really big. You don't do it, there's a big stick. In the United States, you've got free press, so they have to be independent. In the US, you have companies that have shareholders with fiduciary responsibility. And so, you know, if the government says we've got a national interest, nobody gives a damn, right? Trump is going to change some of that. And changing that will divide Americans. Changing that will entrench a lot of the existing and increasingly polarized left versus right, identity politics, right? Black versus white, gender politics, you name it, stuff that we don't want, right? I mean, in the sense that the United States historically was able to integrate immigrants. Yes, we killed the original natives, but after that, and we brought some slaves over, but after that, we integrated these people, right? And we did a pretty good job of it, and it created some extraordinary success stories. It created the American dream for people all over the world. That's great, But in a world where you're building more walls because globalization is falling apart, that's going to happen inside the United States too. And Trump is a master at exploiting those divisions for the benefit of himself, his family, and perhaps we'll see his administration.
Great. One more question really quick. If you could give Trump one piece of advice on his first day in office, what would it be?
I don't know that I could give Trump advice because most people that you give advice to are capable of taking advice. The thing that worries me most, the advice I would want Trump to take would be, I mean, he now has a cabinet with appointees, some of whom are very good. I look at Tillerson at State and Mattis Defense, and assuming they're get through and confirmed, and there's some questions around Tillerson, but I still think he'll get it. I think these are very capable people, adults that deserve to be in cabinet, right? I think that I would want Trump to listen to them. I would want Trump to, when you know, the fact that he has lots of adults around him in a room that know policy and he has no policy background whatsoever, I would want him to engage and leverage and devolve power and all those things. I think Trump's capacity to listen to advice, particularly listen to advice from, you know, sort of an expert that he doesn't necessarily have a 10 or 20 year personal relationship with, is effectively zero. And I didn't necessarily, I intuited that when he first came on the screen, but we didn't know it because we didn't have experience. We now have experience of how he's run a campaign, how he's put a team together, how he tweets, how he responds to, you know, things he doesn't like. And he's 70 years old. I don't think he's changing. So my ability to give Trump advice, this is part of the problem. Part of the uncertainty is that some people just can't. I think that my role is to speak truth to power. And to the extent that we have power ourselves, then you can maximize that, right? But I am keenly aware of the fact that over 20 years to 19 years of running Eurasia Group, that you can have a corporate CEO, they could be paying you a lot of money, but they're just not going to listen because they know what they're doing already. All they want is they got confirmation bias. If you tell them what they want to hear, then it's coming, and otherwise they're just tuning it out, right? And I've seen that from heads of state. I've seen that from ministers. That is absolutely a paradigm of personality that exists. It's more likely to be found among insecure men than it is, you know, among other types of people. But Trump has that to a greater degree than any world leader in a democratic state that I have ever encountered, right, in my life. And so as a consequence, I think we've got a problem here. Which is that we have a lot of really smart people around him, and it's not at all clear to me that they're going to be able to break through. And maybe it takes a crisis, right? I mean, we know he's going to break some stuff, and some stuff needs to be broken. And that can lead to some good things too. But I do remember the one thing that gives me hope on this count is that when the election was going badly for him, there was a period of time, you may remember, when they took away his phone, right? And I mean, I don't know how he existed, right? Because I mean, clearly this man needs his phone, right? I mean, he's wedded to the stream of information both ways. And, but they took it away. And as a consequence, he normalized for a few days. And then of course he went back. I mean, I do hope that if God forbid, we're a few months in and we get into a crisis with China, where there is some military escalation, where the economy is teetering, where we could be in a trade war if we get it wrong, he's going to have a lot more adults around him than he does now, and he's going to be hearing it from him. I hope that in that environment that we can take away his phone, that we can sit him down, not allow him to suddenly just shout out policy, and actually really let the government be governed, because he's not presidential. He's not going to become presidential. Like we just have to be honest about that. And you know what? If the alt-right wants to attack me for saying that, they can fuck themselves, right? It's not really my problem, because I have to be. If I'm not honest, I might as well quit. I might as well just stop doing what I'm doing. But we have to hope that despite not being presidential, he is the president. He's my president. He's your president. He's been elected. It is a legitimate process. And he's going to run the country. And there's a lot of power that comes with that. And we have to hope that when he gets himself in trouble, and he's going to, that he's going to be able to rely on the adults around him. Final point, Obama's press conference yesterday, which was the last that he'll give as president, he was asked about, sort of, is he concerned in Trump and all the rest, and what advice he gave. And he said, the consistent advice that I gave Trump, the most important advice was, you can't do this job by yourself. That is an extremely polite way of saying exactly what I just said. So I do think this is a real concern. No drama. Obama doesn't want to freak people out. This is a real concern.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for Ian Bremmer from the Eurasia Group for joining us today.
Okay, go alt-right.